For years they told you sugar only affects weight and diabetes. But after 60, there's a truth almost no one tells you. Sugar acts in silence against your muscles. Most muscle loss after 60 isn't from aging, it's from sugar quietly blocking your muscles from responding. Not sugar in the dramatic dessert on your birthday sense. I'm talking about the invisible daily sugar that slips into coffee cups, breakfast pastries, sauces, and healthy snacks, doing its damage without pain, without warning, and without showing up on most routine lab tests. I've watched this pattern unfold for decades, and it's one of the most misunderstood reasons older adults lose strength despite doing everything right. Here's the silent threat we never talk about. Added sugar doesn't just raise blood sugar for a few hours and then disappear. It sends a constant chemical signal that locks your muscle cells into resistance mode. Your muscles are supposed to listen for repair instructions after you eat protein or move your body. Sugar interferes with that conversation. Over time, the message stops getting through. You can lift groceries, walk daily, eat chicken or fish, and still feel weaker month after month, not because your effort is wrong, but because your muscles are no longer receiving the signal to rebuild. Think of insulin as a messenger that knocks on the door of your muscle cells. Early in life, that door opens easily. Nutrients enter, repairs happen, strength returns. But when sugar keeps insulin knocking all day long, year after year, the cells stop answering. The door stays closed, protein can't get inside where it's needed. Repair instructions pile up outside, ignored. This is why muscle loss after 60 feels so unfair. You're trying, but the biology has changed, and sugar quietly makes that change worse. And this isn't just about numbers on a chart or abstract muscle fibers under a microscope. Losing muscle shows up in the most personal ways. It's the hesitation before standing up from a chair, the hand that reaches for a railing on the stairs, the subtle fear of falling that changes how you move through your own home. Muscle is what protects your independence. When it fades, confidence fades with it. I've seen strong, capable people begin shrinking their lives, not because they're lazy or old, but because their bodies stopped responding the way they used to. That's why this conversation matters, because when added sugar is removed, something remarkable happens inside aging muscle, and it doesn't take years. Over the next 30 days, the internal noise begins to quiet. Signals start getting through again. The body remembers how to respond. In this video, I'm going to walk you through what really happens to your muscles day by day when added sugar is taken out of the equation. Not theory, not trends. What the biology actually does when you finally stop blocking it. There's a quiet assumption many people carry into their 60s and 70s, and it sounds reasonable on the surface. Sugar affects weight. Sugar affects diabetes. Sugar affects teeth. Muscle strength, on the other hand, is often blamed on age itself, as if strength simply evaporates on a schedule. But what I've seen repeatedly is something very different. Muscle doesn't disappear first. Communication disappears first. Strength fades only after that conversation inside the body breaks down. By the time we pass 60, muscle tissue is already less responsive than it once was. This isn't a flaw or a failure. It's a biological shift that happens to everyone. The problem begins when added sugar enters the picture and amplifies that shift. Sugar worsens the natural decline in insulin sensitivity that comes with age, and this directly interferes with a critical rebuilding pathway called mTOR. This pathway is how muscles interpret meals and movement as a signal to repair and strengthen themselves. When sugar dominates the environment, that signal is weakened, distorted, or blocked altogether. The muscle is present, the protein is present, but the instruction to rebuild never lands. An easy way to understand this is to picture muscle cells as a heavy door with aging hinges. Over time, those hinges stiffen slightly, which is manageable. But sugar accelerates the process, adding layer after layer of rust. The door still exists, but it no longer opens when it's supposed to. Protein arrives at the doorstep after a meal, yet it can't get inside where repair actually happens. From the outside, everything looks adequate. Inside, the machinery is stalled. I remember a man named Ed, 69 years old, sharp-minded and disciplined. He made sure protein was part of every meal. He stayed active. Still, his grip weakened, his legs tired more quickly, and his confidence began to slip. The issue wasn't effort or motivation. His muscles simply weren't hearing the signal anymore. Sugar had been quietly interfering for years, masking the real reason his strength was fading. When added sugar is removed from the daily routine, the internal environment begins to change in a very specific way. Sugary drinks, sweetened coffee, pastries, candy, flavored yogurts, and hidden sugars in packaged foods no longer dominate the bloodstream. Whole fruit, eaten in modest amounts and paired with meals, behaves differently, arriving with fiber and nutrients that soften its impact. Food labels suddenly matter, especially when added sugar climbs beyond 5 grams per serving. This shift doesn't feel dramatic at first, but inside the muscle cell the hinges begin to loosen. The door doesn't fly open overnight, but it stops rusting shut, and that subtle change sets the stage for everything that follows. There is a particular kind of stiffness that many people notice as the years pass, a heaviness that settles into muscles and joints and seems to arrive faster as the day goes on. It's often brushed off as normal wear and tear, the price of a long life well lived. But beneath that stiffness is a biochemical process that is anything but passive. Sugar doesn't just interfere with signaling, it physically alters the structure of muscle itself, changing how it moves, stretches, and recovers. When excess sugar circulates in the bloodstream, it has a tendency to attach itself to proteins. This process forms compounds known as advanced glycation end products, or AGEs. These compounds behave like microscopic glue. They stiffen muscle fibers, reduce elasticity in tendons, and create a low-grade inflammatory environment that never quite shuts off. Over time, this sticky damage accelerates sarcopenia, the gradual loss of muscle quality that robs strength long before muscle size visibly shrinks. A helpful image is caramel poured onto delicate machinery. The gears still turn, but not smoothly. Movement becomes inefficient. Energy is wasted. Muscles may still contract, but they fatigue faster and recover more slowly. This is why someone can feel reasonably strong in the morning, yet unusually stiff and weak by the afternoon. The muscles aren't broken, they're gummed up. I think of Ruth, 74 years old, who described her days as having a narrow window of vitality. Mornings felt manageable. By mid-afternoon, her legs felt heavy, her movements cautious. This pattern wasn't random. It reflected inflammation driven by glycation, quietly accumulating as sugar interacted with her muscle tissue throughout the day. The damage wasn't dramatic, but it was relentless. As sugar exposure decreases, the internal chemistry begins to shift. The order in which foods arrive matters because it shapes how glucose enters the bloodstream. Protein arriving first softens the glucose response. Vegetables slow absorption further. Carbohydrates arriving last land in a calmer metabolic environment. Ending food intake earlier in the evening gives muscles and connective tissue a longer window without sugar exposure, allowing repair processes to proceed without interference. Even something as simple as fluids with meals changes how concentrated glucose becomes as it moves through the system. None of this produces instant relief, and that's important to understand. Glycation damage doesn't dissolve overnight. But when sugar stops feeding the process, the stickiness stops spreading. Inflammation begins to quiet. Muscles regain some of their natural glide and responsiveness. Strength no longer drains away as the day progresses, and for many, the body begins to feel more predictable again. This quiet reversal sets the stage for the deeper changes that unfold as the sugar-free days continue to accumulate. By the second and third week without added sugar, something subtle but important begins to shift, even though many people don't recognize it right away. There's an expectation that change should be visible, measurable, or immediate. When the scale doesn't move or muscles don't suddenly look different, doubt creeps in. But the real work during this phase is happening far beneath the surface, at the level of cellular communication and metabolic tone. As sugar intake drops, baseline insulin levels begin to settle. This matters more than most people realize. Constantly elevated insulin acts like background noise that drowns out other signals. When that noise fades, muscle cells regain the ability to respond. Transporters such as GLUT4 become more effective at moving glucose where it belongs rather than leaving it circulating and causing damage. At the same time, inflammatory messengers that interfere with repair begin to decrease, creating an internal environment that favors recovery rather than breakdown. A useful way to picture this phase is like tuning a radio. At first, the signal is full of static. The message is there, but it's distorted and hard to understand. As the interference fades, the same signal suddenly comes through clearly. Protein intake, movement, and daily activity begin to register again as meaningful instructions rather than background noise. The muscle hasn't changed its purpose. It has simply regained its ability to listen. Carlos, 66 years old, noticed this change before he ever saw it. By the third week, his legs felt more reliable. He could walk longer without that familiar burning fatigue. Stairs felt less demanding. These weren't dramatic transformations, but they were consistent. And consistency is often the first sign that muscles are responding again. Strength returns quietly before it announces itself. During this period, the way protein interacts with muscle begins to normalize. Meals containing adequate protein send a clearer repair signal. Leucine-rich sources such as eggs, Greek yogurt, and fish play a particularly strong role in activating rebuilding pathways. Timing also starts to matter more because muscles become receptive again after movement, rather than resistant. The body shifts from a defensive posture to a cooperative one. What's important to understand is that this phase is about restoration, not acceleration. Muscles aren't being forced to grow, they're being allowed to respond. The internal brakes that sugar applied begin to release, and the system starts working the way it was designed to. This is why endurance often improves before visible muscle does. The foundation is being repaired, setting the stage for the final and most misunderstood obstacle that still blocks progress for many people, even when sugar appears to be gone. At this stage, many people believe the problem has been solved. Sugar has been removed, labels are checked, desserts are gone, and yet the expected surge in energy or strength never fully arrives. The confusion is understandable because something still feels off. The body seems stuck in neutral, as if it's revving without moving forward. What's happening here is one of the most overlooked disruptions in muscle recovery after 60. Sweet taste alone has power. Even without calories, even without glucose, certain sweeteners can trigger anticipatory responses in the body. The brain senses sweetness and prepares for sugar that never comes. Insulin is released in advance. Digestive and hormonal signals shift. Over time, this mismatch creates metabolic confusion. Muscle cells receive mixed messages, and repair remains blunted. The sugar may be gone, but the signal noise is still there. It's similar to starting a car engine over and over without ever driving anywhere. The engine wears down, fuel is wasted, and nothing productive happens. In the body, repeated insulin release without actual nourishment creates wear without repair. Cravings increase, energy dips. Muscles remain reluctant to respond fully, even though the obvious source of sugar has been removed. Janet, 71, experienced this plateau. She eliminated desserts and sweetened foods, yet relied heavily on diet sodas and sugar-free products. Weeks passed, and her strength stayed flat. The missing piece wasn't discipline or effort. It was the constant artificial stimulation of sweetness, keeping her metabolic system on edge. Once that stimulation faded, her energy stabilized, and her muscles finally began to respond to meals and movement again. During a true sugar break, the body recalibrates its sense of taste and expectation. Subtle flavors become more noticeable. Spices like cinnamon and vanilla provide warmth without triggering insulin surges. Sweetness, when it appears, comes from whole fruit, arriving slowly and predictably without confusing the system. This clarity allows muscle tissue to operate without constant false alarms. This final adjustment often determines whether the 30-day reset delivers its full benefit. When sweetness stops hijacking the signaling system, the body settles into a calmer rhythm. Muscles are no longer distracted by phantom signals. Repair pathways function without interruption. And for many, this is the moment when strength begins to return in a way that feels real, steady, and sustainable. By the end of these 30 days, the most important change is not something you can point to on a chart or capture in a photo. What changes first is communication. Muscles that once felt distant, unresponsive, or unreliable begin to answer again. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but steadily. And that distinction matters because it reveals something many people were never told. The muscle was never gone. The signal was. For years, sugar acted like a constant interruption inside the body. Every time it appeared, it distorted the message muscles were supposed to receive. Repair signals were delayed, softened, or ignored altogether. Over time, the body adapted by becoming defensive. Muscles stopped responding with the same confidence they once had. That silence was mistaken for aging, when in reality it was biochemical confusion. When the interference fades, clarity returns. This is where the idea often attributed to Mark Hyman becomes impossible to ignore. Food is information. It tells your cells how to behave, what to prioritize, and what to shut down. Sugar sends a message of emergency and excess, even when no emergency exists. Aging muscles, already more cautious by nature, interpret that message as a reason to resist change. When sugar is removed, the message changes. Meals stop sounding like alarms and start sounding like instructions again. What follows is not a burst of strength, but a return of responsiveness. Protein once again means repair instead of storage. Movement once again signals adaptation instead of stress. Inflammation no longer dominates the background. The body shifts from a state of constant vigilance into one of quiet cooperation. This is why many people report feeling more stable before they feel stronger. Balance improves. Endurance stretches a little further. Fatigue stops arriving so early in the day. There is also an emotional shift that deserves attention. When muscles respond again, trust returns. Trust in your legs to carry you. Trust in your grip to hold steady. Trust in your body to support you instead of surprising you. This trust changes how you move through the world. Steps become more deliberate, but also more confident. The fear of falling loosens its grip, not because risk disappears, but because control begins to return. Strength after 60 is often misunderstood as something aggressive or forceful. In reality, it is quiet. It shows up in the ability to rise from a chair without bracing yourself, in the ease of climbing stairs without planning each step, in the absence of that subtle hesitation before everyday movements. These are not small things. They are the foundations of independence. What matters most is understanding this. You were not failing your body. Your body was responding exactly as it was programmed to respond to constant sugar signals. When those signals change, the response changes too. 30 days without added sugar does not reverse time, but it does restore permission. Permission for muscles to listen again. Permission for repair to resume. Permission for strength to express itself without resistance. The takeaway is simple, but not shallow. Aging did not steal your strength. Confusion did. And when clarity returns, the body remembers what to do.